Okay, great. I'm gonna kick us off. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you all here. Today's webinar, I'm really pleased. We've got our friends from Careerwise here, Jill and Eric, and hopefully Brent as well. We're really covering all the time zones today. So they're going to be talking about the work Careerwise do, setting up youth apprenticeship systems across the country, and we're going to dive into their work in New York and in New York City and in rural Colorado. What's unique about working in those different areas and what's replicable. Um, so before we get into it, I'll pass over to Jill. I just wanted to say a couple of kind of framing things, thoughts from AFA. Firstly, just touching on kind of why youth apprenticeships are so important, and this will be familiar for anyone who's been at our recent sessions on reaching 1 million apprenticeships and the president's executive order. We think youth has got to be a really major part of that. So currently, if you look at the numbers, youth apprenticeship numbers are really low. I'm mainly talking about anyone under 25, particularly low for 16 to 18-year-olds. So the typical cohort graduating high school, that's around 3.7 million people a year. We think of that cohort, there's only around 14,000 people taking a registered apprenticeship. So that's just 0.4% of the cohort. If you look at other countries where youth apprenticeship has become a kind of mainstream route and pathway, so Germany and Switzerland are the classic examples I'm sure you all know about, where they've got the dual education system. Around 50 to 70% of that cohort is taking an apprenticeship. UK, other countries are lower than that, but still sort of 10 to 20% or so. So coming back to the US, if we had around 10% of the high school cohort taking an apprenticeship, we'd be looking at 370,000 new apprentices a year. So it could be a really significant part of that growth story. That's raw numbers, but it's not just the numbers. We also care about this from the kind of outcome side. We know apprenticeships can work for everyone. In the UK, we like to say, apprenticeships are an all age, all level of education approach. You can upskill, you can retrain at any age. But if you look at the data, the outcomes are particularly good for young people, especially if you look at wages. Young people tend to get the most impact out of apprenticeships. And we know here we've got a problem with the pipeline. We have around half of the young people going to college aren't graduating within 6 years. So growing youth apprenticeships has to be part of that solution. That's all I was going to say in terms of framing from us. A bit of housekeeping before I pass over to you, Jill. Firstly, the meeting's been recorded. We'll put it on our YouTube channel afterwards and send it around. Secondly, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A towards the end. So as we're going along, please put any questions in the sidebar or put your hand up in that Q&A session, and we'll pick up your questions. So that's it, and I'm going to pass over to you, Jim.
Awesome. Thanks, Harry. Okay, so I am going to do just a little bit of my own framing following Harry's framing, but then I will, in about 10 minutes, get out of the way and you can hear directly from Brent about the work going on in New York, specifically related to mobilizing the healthcare sector around pathway development. And then you'll be able to hear from Eric about the work going on in mountain rural Colorado, in Eagle County, and what's actually happening on the ground. So before we get into that, I'm just going to preach to the choir just a little bit here. As Harry mentioned, statistically, we're seeing this college for all dominant narrative starting to crack a little bit. And while we're not saying that college is a bad path, what we are saying is that there is an opportunity to enhance it and to improve upon it and to ensure that our young people are able to test drive different career pathways and gain exposure and really nurture their own interests and aptitudes by engaging in the world of work before they have to make major decisions about post-secondary and likely incur tens of thousands of dollars of student debt. What we're also seeing, and this came out in a recent Deloitte study, is not just about the skills gap that employers are often bemoaning, but this experience gap. So even when the 50% of young people do make it through a 4-year degree in 6 years, many employers are complaining that they don't have the years of work experience. So that's putting our young people into this catch-22. If they don't go to college, they're falling out of our system and struggling to find work. And if they do go to college, employers are saying, well, that's great, but where's your work experience? So what Careerwise is really on this path towards doing is creating new pathways that connect high school and careers. And we're doing it in collaboration with so many of you on this call. In that we are kind of preaching to the choir here. I'm not going to spend too much time defining youth apprenticeship, but just see here briefly, we know the definition varies across states. We know some states don't yet have it defined in statute. We know we do not have a federal definition, but across the board, it's really about connecting students as young as 16 to employment, making sure they have competency-based on-the-job learning, paid work experience with incremental wage increases, related technical instruction, industry recognized credentials that industry partners have actually said, yes, we care about this, and ideally that post-secondary credit as well to speed them up should they want to pursue additional higher education. Additionally, what we're seeing is that high quality youth apprenticeships are connected to the registered system as well. And this is a movement. Yes, we're focusing on 2 regions today, but before all of you hopped on, we said, wow, we could shine a light on any of these regions and more than just the dots on this map show, because there is so much momentum happening in this area. And if you are looking at this slide and saying, oh, that's busy and kind of overwhelming, that's the beauty of it, right? This work is building in momentum. We are bipartisan in nature. It's hard to refute the benefits of this work. And we're seeing this coalition of the willing, the tent growing bigger and bigger, which is fantastic. But with the big tent nationwide and then zooming in on any community that's trying to do this, there are a lot of players at the table. And we know that it is a complicated table to sit at. It doesn't just take a village to do this work. We've got the employers and the education partners and the post-secondary partners and workforce and students and their parents, et cetera. Not just a village, but a coordinated village. And many of us on this call are those intermediaries, those nonprofits or workforce boards or chambers of commerce or school districts who are sitting at the middle trying to translate between all of these different institutions we're bringing together to do this work in a structured and seamless way. And the big question is, how do we do that? How do we organize this system to make it seamless and easy for employers who will duck out if it's not easy and simple, and our young people who will be confused and duck out if it's not easy and simple? So it's incumbent upon us, the organizing coalitions, the intermediary partners, to figure out what are those conditions that make a successful apprenticeship pathway. And I'm going to take you through in this fun animated slide, a bunch of words, but it is our kind of recipe for success, the conditions for success. And then I will toss it over to Brent and to Eric to talk about it in reality. So when we put together, okay, scratching our heads, what does it take to make a successful apprenticeship? First, obviously, you think about the apprenticeship itself. During the apprenticeship, it's the OJT, it's the related instruction, it's how you're engaging apprentices, how you're supporting employers, making sure we have consistent assessment and are tracking proficiency across those competencies, and that there's a clear definition of what it means to complete that apprenticeship and how you're transitioning to the next step. Okay, but you can't just like poof into an apprenticeship. So we need to think about what happens before. How are we designing a strong pathway? How are we making sure that we have anchor employer partners recruited and onboarded so they're ready to catch those apprentices and recruit them and hire them? But for those potential apprentices, how are we making sure that we're building their career readiness so that they don't land in a 3-year apprenticeship never having heard of what a software developer does if they're in a coding apprenticeship. So we're really thinking about building that foundation before they dive in. And then, of course, on the back end, how do we make sure that our alumni are engaged in a way that ensures we're invested in their longitudinal outcomes, but that they, the alumni, are actually our best amplifiers of this work, helping to recruit the next generation of apprentices and, really sell this better than you or I could to employers who listen to an apprentice or an alumni and are like, my gosh, where can I get 10 of those? And that doesn't happen in a vacuum, but we need all of these different supporting components. This is kind of the non-sexy work that it takes to make this go. It's the funding, it's the data, it's the comms and marketing strategy, the infrastructure that we use from a tech perspective to enable scale. How are we navigating the registered apprenticeship system, which is a necessary area of complexity, I will say. And then project management. How do we make sure that those of us in the center are organized, are holding other partners accountable, and are really clear on essentially the dominoes that need to fall to make this program work? My last thing before I kind of toss it over to some of my partners here is that all of this, a program cannot exist in a vacuum. And whoop, and I've lost my, oh, there it is. Okay. And sometimes it's hard to get to this system alignment foundational piece. And this is often what people think of last, but really this has to come first. How do we make sure we have a very clear vision, mission, and program model that our champions are aligned around, that we are clear on all of these different functions and who owns them from a capacity and structural perspective, that we are having a finger on the pulse of our business environment and demand, as well as our education environment, and that policy, again, so critical. We understand what those different measures are that help us unlock scale and help remove some of the barriers that exist to even getting pilots off the ground. And last, how are we effectively engaging our partners in a way that mobilizes them effectively and leverages them across their areas of expertise? So, kind of a mouthful here. What are the conditions for success and how do we make this work go? What I am going to do now is turn the mic over to my colleague, Brent Parton, Careerwise's president and acting executive director of our New York team. And he's going to talk a little bit more, kind of zooming in on the business environment and demand, how we mobilize sectors to do this work.
Thanks, Jill. Great job. And I'll just underscore a couple points through an example I want to walk through with you all here today about in the healthcare industry in New York, which is what you laid out, Jill, is this three-part sequence to how you think about the success of not, I would argue, just even youth apprenticeship pathways, but really creating these pathways that create value at the same time, importantly, for the students to participate in them, not as just connecting to a job, but for long-term career mobility, but also value for the employers that very actively invest in these experiences, the return on investment, the ROI, is that you actually have to look at, we can't look about building quality programs without considering the kind of bookends of what happens before the apprenticeship and after. But just to be quite honest and clear about this, we can't seriously think about scale of these types of experiences without greater attention to how you are building kind of that ecosystem of partners that are going to help you on the front end of that, building that apprenticeship experience at scale, but also who are going to be really a big part of what happens about how you support ongoing success and the employer's ongoing investment in these young people on the back end. And I will say the way that you have to tangle with that is very practical. You have to have an understanding of what those three sequences look like in a given industry, what might be true for the trades, what might be true for healthcare, technology, whether it's a small business, public sector, what it might be true for advanced manufacturing, how it doesn't change the framework that you need to be thinking about that pre what happens before apprenticeship, how you deliver on a quality experience and what happens after. But it's certainly you have to think about what the considerations are of what the realities are from a workforce standpoint in terms of what that sector requires, what mobility looks like for that workforce, how are employers structured and how they exploit, how do they deal with their talent, over the long term. These are all issues that you can't solve for in the general. You really have to have what we call a sector mobilization mentality. And so in addition to thinking very structurally about how we don't to get out of this mindset of how we just grow a program one employer at a time, how do you build this ecosystem for a sector for which these programs can thrive, leveraging a range of public and private resources to do so, that it creates that shared value for both the employers and the students, but also just creating the conditions for much more turnkey engagement of individual employers into an ecosystem rather than building bespoke apprenticeship solutions. So we want to share a little bit today about, I'll be very clear with the qualifier, early days engagement that we are doing in New York City, which is our largest partner market at the moment, where Careerwise leads the work as an intermediary on the ground, where we are working and mobilizing a sector of healthcare partners towards these ends. Next slide, please. First off, I want to say that, we're not starting from scratch. Careerwise is a pretty traditional apprenticeship intermediary in terms of how we have worked historically in Colorado and New York City, where we're out there making it easier for employers to build apprenticeships, start apprenticeship programs, building partnerships with education and training institutions to both recruit apprentices, deliver those programs. But by and large, for the first 10 years plus of our existence, we work with our employer partners deeply to build these programs to generate an ROI. And we help solve for these solutions and really heavily, frankly, case manage apprentices as they work through these experiences. We have been doing that in healthcare in New York before, across several pathways. We initially started in radiology tech positions. And medical assisting, I should say, where we were kind of working with individual employers to really build out these programs and get things piloted. We have learned a lot from 10 years of experience doing that. We have built great expertise. We've worked with a lot of incredible partners. We have also learned what it might take to actually scale this work. There are 13,000 nursing openings in New York City. There are nearly 1 million students in New York City public schools. You can see the numbers right here, and we are scratching the surface over the opportunity to connect the supply and demand talent challenges in a city like New York. And we can't do it one employer and one program at a time. We have been thrilled in terms of how we have really kind of reset and relaunched this work in New York City by approaching it much more from that ecosystem approach of not just what is Careerwise going to do as an intermediary to fill gaps, who are the partners that we need to have clear functions and roles and responsibilities on the New York City public school side, with our partners at the higher education side in CUNY, with our employers, first and foremost, but also in a place like New York, where we are working closely with 1199 and the Training and Education Fund, where 1199 SEIU represents a large chunk of the healthcare workforce within the city. So we have deliberately attacked the next phase of this healthcare work in two unique ways. One, building a partnership table. No surprise to us that have been in workforce. We've all read the frustrating reports that tells us what works in workforce development. Turns out it's partnership. Unfortunately, as boring and redundant it is, doesn't mean it's not true. But then the second part of it is not trying to build a pathway from a Memorial Sloan Kettering and New York Presbyterian individually, but really identifying what are the big hit occupations that are shared. How are we co-designing a pathway together as a sector? How are we understanding that there'll be economies in scale in terms of how we RFP and how we invest in the related instruction and training and procure those things at a more cost-effective level from higher ed partners? How are we creating efficiencies in terms of program recruitment and management across multiple employers at once? This sector mobilization approach is something we had to sell. It was something we had to say would be more cost-effective than going bespoke individualized programs. Because frankly, and it's not just a healthcare thing, businesses are not always necessarily used to cooperating with each other when it comes to this type of work. Again, not revolutionary insights, but really important to share, I think, today a little bit more of the how of how we're putting this kind of framework to work that Jill has mentioned. So to date, we're operating and piloting in 3 pathways. Radiology tech still is a huge area, huge revenue center, of course, for every hospital across America, provider system, not just hospitals, provider systems writ large. Surge techs is another area where there's a critical shortage, at least within New York City. But the big honcho is nursing, and really looking at, if we think of these as pathways into nursing, there is not a registered nursing occupation in the state of New York. I'll be very clear about that. But what we do look at is this is an opportunity how we build apprenticeships within a training ecosystem. So you're getting out of this challenge where we can engage a lot of students and excite them about nursing careers at the final years of high school. We can do great work training students with preceptors and great college programs that provide an associate's degree of nursing. But what's that bridge? And our employer partners are very clear. We get them excited in high school. We hope they go to college and come back to us, but we often lose them in the gap in between. Can we work with Careerwise? Can we work with partners across New York City to basically create an earn and learn pathway that stretches across and bridges these occupations that can be early clinical roles into a full-blown nursing degree? Next slide, please. So you saw the theoretical outline, right? What happens before the apprenticeship, what happens during the apprenticeship, what happens after. This is very practical. The pathway design was built on that. And we worked and convened with 5 provider systems in the city of New York. We, Careerwise, were smart enough not to say, hey, here's an idea. Why don't we get healthcare companies together and talk about stuff? Turns out that happens in a lot of places in New York City. We work with the city of New York, and they have an existing sector partnership. It's an organization called the New York Advancing Careers in Health Partnership that's run out of the city's workforce system. We, of course, work closely with the 1199 Trade Employment Fund, who is a huge partner at a sector basis. And so rather than convening a new conversation, we work with those partners together to use those tables to really co-design with provider systems at once. And here was a little bit of the risk. We have not said you have to commit to hire apprentices tomorrow. We're not building this program in the context of saying, and your apprentices will be recruited in fall. Truth be told, we knew at least some of them would, and some of them were already working with us, like Sloan Kettering and NYP. But the others that were brought to the table were not necessarily committed to the program. They weren't necessarily saying we're ready to implement it yet, but we still wanted on the table to design a pathway to scale. Understanding that if we build something effective, if we build something that has a return on investment, if something that delivers on the shortage, that it's going to take us somewhere. So that 3-part framework is something that we brought to that table. And we said, all right, we know there's resources in the system. We have a strong partnership with 70 high schools across New York, including our partners at the Career Pathways team at New York City Public Schools, who are some of our most important partners and champions in this work. And they've been really visionary with the Career Readiness Modern Youth Apprenticeship Initiative that we're proud to partner with them on. And we really thought about how do we shape those final years of high school to really serve as that ecosystem of not just recruitment and exposure, but skill building into what we call the kind of training occupations, some of the things like medical assistant that is a step into the career. That's a great earn and learn path, but it's something you should do while you are working towards your ADN in a nursing pathway. In terms of the sequence of the youth apprenticeship program, how do we strike that right balance between on-the-job learning and classroom instruction? Excuse me, I combine those, but for a second, it's on-the-job training related classroom instruction. The big key here is that we recognize that if you're a union hospital or a non-union hospital, you might have some different things you're working through. If you're a large hospital system or a network of local providers, you might have some different things you're working towards. Setting that course competency framework, though, is something that allows great levels of customization for on-the-job training, but trying to get a common core experience that would support earn and learn programs starting prior to the release of graduation that gives you a logical next step from phase 1 is fundamental to how you actually not just leave this to guesswork and that you're actually providing young people with opportunities and a foundation that they can connect to the next step. Phase 3, though, is not just about, to be frank, alumni engagement or just what could be your opportunities. We have built into our related instruction model of phase 2, you are working towards your associate's degree of nursing. You might be working as your scope of practice as a medical assistant, in some others, in other sort of outpatient settings, more of an LPN type of role. But at the end of the day, that is not an apprenticeship that's built around that. The apprenticeship is working you toward the nursing degree. It's the idea that it is actually a terminal multi-occupational phase, but it is something that is going to get you into the most critical workforce need there is. So we have used this really 3-sequence model, if you kick to the next slide for the sake of time, to really do this. And we've done this with Sloan Kettering and NYP. As I mentioned, we're early bought-in partners. Sloan Kettering has gone in with the 2 major cohorts of both radiology tech. Again, different occupation, different pathway following that same 3-phase sequence. When we know who's on first with New York City Public Schools and the CTE system in phase 1, we know who's on second, Careerwise working with our employer partners and how we RFP and partner with the higher ed to do the related instruction. And we know who's on third in terms of how the employers are leveraging internal progression funds and benefits, as well as our union partners to provide career advancement and training. Really thinking about kind of how you piece these things together, where Careerwise is not, again, just being this program partner. We've really helped architect in many respects alongside really committed and important partners at every phase, a pathway that multiple employers and organizations can buy into over time. If you click to the next slide, you'll see a quick overview, and we'll make sure you kick these slides around in terms of the nursing pathway. Both of this and the radiology tech are in their pilot years this year. It's very exciting work. We're excited to share about it early on the interview. I think on the webinar today, I think we're excited to talk a little bit about now that that first cohort is going to be in on the job, have been hired in and starting this fall, coming back and telling you all the amazing things that made it work, or maybe things we've learned. But again, something we're trying to get across today is a couple things just to kind of close out here and hand to my friend Eric is to say, we are trying to very deliberately not just have a framework about what a successful program would be, but try to create something that creates greater clarity of roles and functions across a broader set of partners in an ecosystem that we can build towards scale. And using that framework and being consistent as a communication tool, as well as something that helps organize our role across these different phases to really support its success. The hardest thing in America about scaling this work is not that these roles aren't out there and that they don't exist. There's great partners doing work across all three of these phases. The hardest thing is it's very hard to find where the through line is accountability for how they sing together. And that's something that we at Careerwise have really tried to know our role in the space, which is not to reinvent anyone else's, but to really try to connect these pieces into an impactful program for the students and the employers we seek to serve. So I'm going to stop there and hand to Eric because it's very important you hear from him about the exciting work we have going in the other part of the country that Careerwise does its most in-depth work with, but looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, Brent. I feel like I got a little bit of whiplash because I was just nodding along so vehemently every time you said that. Healthcare is one that's incredibly important to us and has been one of our two, that and financial services, one of our two most successful apprenticeship pathways that we've had so far. So yes, I'm nodding away the entire time. And in looking at the chat just a little bit, I'm going off script, but I was seeing that question from Debbie talking about the different ages of students in healthcare. You know, I'll share a very brief story with that is that our hospital system, when we first started offering the apprenticeship program to them, they said, no, you have to be 18 years old. There's an 18-year-old restriction. And I said, you know, according to Colorado youth law and many different documents, that's not actually true. I think it's your own internal documents. And they said, what do we need to do to change that? And I said, bring me to a board meeting. I went to the board meeting of our local hospital. I presented the program and why it's important, and it was a unanimous vote from their, their old policies of requiring people to be 18 to move that down to 16 because they saw the benefits of this program. So some of these hurdles that seem gigantic and immovable can be movable. If you just get the right people in the room and they're willing to listen to the benefits of this program. So I know we can talk about that later on in the questions, and I'll keep moving. All right. I am in Vail. Oh, thanks. Debbie says it's exciting. Or she's just calling me Exciting Eric, which I'll take that as a nickname too. I want to define Vail, Colorado, because when I say Vail, Colorado, there is a vision that comes up in everyone's head as this little ski town, where we're all snow farmers up here, and it's just pouring with money and so forth. But we have a very unique economy in the rural mountains of Colorado. We were the first rural community to adopt the Careerwise program after it started in Denver Public Schools. We had to apply against different communities, and you say Vail sometimes, and people do have a different vision in their head. So, our valley is 55,000 people. Our brief demographics are, if we think about the race breakdown, we're about 30% Hispanic at this point. Our school districts are now at 61% Hispanic. So this is a large and growing population. And if I'm very much generalizing, these are the folks that are often in the lower income brackets, do a lot of the hospitality work, do a lot of the construction work, do a lot of the work that makes our resort company actually run. And so this is not that this program is designed specifically for that, because we have had every color and flavor and size and shape of student go through the program at this point. But it certainly works extremely well for some of those populations that could use just a little bit of a hand up in some certain ways. We're in our 8th cohort. of apprentices. We started back in the day with a very small group of students, and we have been building since. We actually even had a cohort during the COVID time as we saw the benefits of that and were able to make that work. But we have learned a lot of things over the years and taken a lot of body blows, is what I like to say, and finding these different things. So my brief Valley demographics as I continue, and here's the why, because it's always about the why with your community, and especially with the business engagement, is why should a youth apprenticeship program make any sort of sense in our community? Our demographics say that America sends us their best and brightest between the ages of 18 and 24 to become ski bums in our town and ride the lifts and work a restaurant job and smoke weed and do all the things that they think they want to do in Colorado. I'm sorry to joke about that, but it's true. People do come to Colorado because it's, a little bit more lax, a little bit more fun, that mountain atmosphere. So we have a large influx of 18 to 24-year-olds. So, oh, look I got a plug from Joe. I appreciate it. But large influx of 18 to 24-year-olds into our valley. So a large a pool, if you will, of that entry-level labor. From ages 24 to 29, we see those demographics go about flat. The same amount of people entering our town and the same amount of people leaving our town. And from ages 30 to 64, we see an extreme outmigration of people in our valley. And that is due to, when I speak to the students, I say, why do you guys think this is true? And the students will say, we don't know. And I say, it's the birds and the bees. Because when you came into Vail and you were 19 years old, you slept on that futon with 7 other people in the apartment. You worked your 2 jobs, and you loved doing that. You rose to the level of middle manager at whatever your company was, somewhere an early middle manager. And then you met somebody and you wanted to live in an apartment with that person, and you couldn't afford that. So that sends a good population of the people out. And then people end up having a child. And good Lord, if people have a child in our town, they are exiting as quickly as possible because they want to go back to Missouri or Kansas City or Wisconsin or wherever they came from before. So they have grandma and grandpa to babysit, and they have a backyard where that child can grow up, and they have a garage where they can put their vehicle. And then if you have 2 kids or 3 kids, you're just not making it in this town anymore. It really is. The cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of childcare are so prohibitive in our valley that we end up losing that really early level middle management. If I think of a construction company and somebody who's been hanging drywall, punching nails, hanging drywall, being part of that crew, at about the 30-year-old level, they've risen to that early middle manager, if you will. They're the person directing the crews and telling the electricians when to come in next. And that is the group of people that end up exiting our valley so quickly. And so our businesses have been looking for solutions. How do we replace this group of people? We went to all sorts of different things when we first started. When I first started, and I work for the Chamber of Commerce, which is our regional Chamber of Commerce, and we are the economic development engine for the county. So I don't work for the school districts. I'm a coach, I guess, but I don't work for the school district. But I work very closely with the school district, and I'll define that in another slide in just a minute. But um, oh, I'm losing my train of thought right there. Anyway, the demographics, yeah, where am I going with this one? Boy, I just lost it where I was going. Yeah, let's go into the next slide and do some worth thing. Hey, I apologize for being a little off too. I'm at a conference in Philadelphia where we're talking about economic innovation in times of social and political fragmentation. So I feel like my brain has been poured into all sorts of things, which is also why I look a little orange with this hotel light. Anyway. Eagle County Work-Based Learning, where we started with this and why we started 8 years ago was because our valley really needed these. And what I was saying before, the train just got back on the rails, is that we went to many different pathways to try and find these employees, to try and find those early middle managers. We used to go to Denver and Colorado Springs and do big hiring fairs and bring people into our community, bring people of my age and younger and all different ages into the community. And what we found is that it takes approximately $40,000 to $50,000 to train these people up to the position that we need them to be. And on average in our community, they last about 18 months. And it's an unsustainable work model. People go through one winter where you've got literally 7 feet of snow in the front yard, and a gallon of organic milk costs $7 at the grocery store, and people say, nope, I'm going somewhere else and I'm going to do something else. So we needed a solution. And me as the Chamber of Commerce, or me working for the Chamber of Commerce, it was our job to create workforce pathways that made sense. And by far, our best pool of labor does come from these students and the opportunities that we then give them. So again, we started 8 years ago. And if you'll go to the next one, this is important too, because these are the people that we work with. Like you said, we don't work in silos, and we really do need a partnership. When we applied with Careerwise to become the first rural community, I went to every town, which we have 7 towns, a couple of special districts. I went to a number of major employers. I went to the school district. I went to the college. I went to larger nonprofits. And I went to each one of these and presented the idea of youth apprenticeship, saying, do you think, not here's what we think, but do you think this would make sense for our community? I had every single town and county write a letter of support, put together a gigantic packet of support, and then we did our application to Careerwise to be this first rural community. But I really am glad that we went through that process, because what that did, and it may seem like a small point, but what that did is it wasn't our idea. I work for something called the Vail Valley Partnership. It wasn't us saying, look at this great program that we are going to save the valley with. It was the entire valley saying, we need a workforce pipeline solution, and us saying, hey, we think this will work, and so does the entire valley. We would be happy to implement this because it's right in our wheelhouse. So then I put together the Tiger team right here of a local community college that's fantastic, our local labor, and our CDLE board with the Colorado Workforce Center. Our local school district, Eagle County School District, and this is the part where people want to reach through the screen and smack me around, because I have one school district that I get to work with. I had to get one superintendent on board. I can even see Brent nodding. He's like, you know how many school districts I have in New York that I understand that there's in so many of your communities, there's different people that you have to get on board with that. But, and then you see there's a little button at the bottom that says Youth Power 365, and that I added into the group. It's a larger nonprofit, but they have a very, very strong outreach into our Hispanic community, and especially into the families, mostly through soccer programs. And so they are respected very much in that space. And we thought they needed to be part of this moving forward. And it's been the team that we went to. So again, not just us dropping a program and saying, here's what makes sense, but us really asking our community, what do you think makes sense? Do you think this will be something that we should do in the future? And that really has kind of defined our work, in the fact that we are honored to be the ones who then present the apprenticeship program. Not our responsibility, but our pleasure to do it. If we go to the next one. And here's how I work with the school district. So, and I'm building on the shoulders of giants, as this has been something that's happened over the years. We had something called CareerX in our community, which is the school district's local workforce programs that they do. And that is, as you can see, the job shadowing and the internships are covered by Eagle County School District, but they didn't have the bandwidth or the knowledge on how to pull off an apprenticeship program. But we continue to use them for the job shadows, the internship program, and then we put the capstone on that as the apprenticeship. One of the questions that always comes up is, do your students have to go through these in order? Do they have to climb the ladder? And absolutely not. I mean, they can jump right into the apprenticeship program if they're juniors or seniors. They can do internship programs, multiple of those, but we let the school district handle the internship and job shadow side, because I really do think those fall more upon the mutual ROI, or the ROI lending toward the student side. But on our side, we have to make this business-based. This has to be a business-based solution that makes sense for the businesses. You know, one of the things I rail against sometimes when people start new programs is business incentives, paying businesses to take an apprentice on. And that's something that I've always been very opposed to, because I think the incentive for the business is the employee. That's what they are in there for at the beginning, is to get themselves a new workforce. All right. Yeah. Let's roll on to the next one. Because I like this. I mean, this is how we go through it. You enter high school, the CareerX, the apprenticeships, and so forth. But if we hit this, I'm wondering what other couple slides I have. The benefits of a youth apprentices are all my apprentices. You know, we don't use any stock photos. All my kids at work over the years who have been doing things. A couple of pieces that I would lay out here before we do jump to some questions from the crowd is that this is available to any other student, although sometimes you're not allowed to say it in this world now. This is the most diverse, equitable, and inclusive program that we've ever done in our thing. I've had students who are my D-minus students who are about to fail out of high school and wanting to be a part of this program. I've also had the salutatorian of our high school saying, "Oh my word, why would I not do this? This makes so much sense for my future." If you hit the next one, this is my favorite slide to share with students, and this is the conversation that I have. I stand in front of a group of students and I hold up two pieces of paper and I say, "This one is a college degree. What did this cost?" And you know, they come to $200,000. And I say, "This is an apprenticeship certification. What did this cost?" And they say, "Zero." And I say, "Wrong. You actually made about $40,000 to $50,000 while you were attaining this. What skills come with this? What skills come with this?" And you know, we go through some of those exercises with the students. And then what I share with them is who, if I'm a hiring manager, who am I more interested in at this point? We're not steering people away from college, as Jill said at the beginning. This is not at all what we do through apprenticeship programs, but we consider college to be another tool in your tool belt when it comes to our program. So I do a little time lapse with the kids. I mean, 10 years ago, we were looking at college degrees. Businesses were saying that's absolutely what I want to do. That's the person I have to hire. I think and I know that our valley has changed. We no longer hire the piece of paper in our valley. We have moved to hiring the right person, and that person is usually one who is trained through apprentices. I'll tell you a story or two as we move into the questions section, but Harry and Jill, I'll pause my time at this moment. This is my favorite thing to talk about, and I can talk. I mean, besides my children, and I can just keep going on this. So we can move on to what's next.
Brilliant. Eric, Jill, Brent, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot to unpack there. And some really interesting differences and parallels between the two areas we're talking about here. I'm gonna ask some questions, and then if you're in the audience, please put your hand up or put a question in the sidebar, and we'll start picking those up. Eric, I'm gonna keep you on the mic for a little bit here. We talk a lot about kind of systems and frameworks. It's all really important stuff, but it can get really a bit theoretical. Love that you don't have stock photos. You've got photos of your real apprentices. So I wanted to ask you a bit about them. Can you share any success stories about your apprentices and what they've done?
We have had all the stories over the years, the successful ones, the unsuccessful ones, but even those unsuccessful ones, to be honest, there has been positive in growth through both the businesses and the apprentices. I think my favorite metric that I like to share is that my retention, my business retention throughout the entire 8 years, every single business that has taken on an apprentice has chosen to do that again and continue on with that. So it shows that it's not just about sometimes the success rate of an individual student, but it really is about the program that they believe in. If you wanted to go to that picture, I could show you my friend Luis. He was a fantastic success story, and he had a bit of a moment that I wanted to share with you. Luis was a young high school student, Luis Avila, right there. He started working for a local construction company called Gallegos. They bring their apprentices in and they make them do the first 4 to 5 months in HR and accounting because they want them to know where the people and the money come from. And then the students are allowed to move into whatever their designation. Luis was wanting to be a stone worker, and this is a construction company that's known for a lot of their stone work. He became a stone worker, but early on in his apprenticeship, the thing about Luis is that his father owns Avila Stone Company. So Luis went to work for the larger stone company in town, and his father has a smaller stone company in town. And some of the longtime employees of the construction company did not like that because they thought, "Who's this young kid? Why is he trying to come in and take all of our secrets and then go steal them away and take them to his father's company?" They actually left him at a job site. They did a little bit of hazing on the kid, abandoned him at a job site once. The CEO called me just storming mad about what was happening, and I said, let's just bring the company together and let me explain that to them. It's been a great lesson that we've learned. In my business recruitment, I've always gone to the CEO, and then you say, okay, let's go to the HR manager, and then we get a mentor or two. But the rest of the company, it sometimes doesn't know why we're pouring so much time and love into this student. So I brought the whole construction company together, explained the entire program to the entire company as to why this is an important hiring solution for our valley, and everybody kind of went, "Oh, all right, we get that," and then moved on from there. I mean, he was one of the most successful apprentices we've had there. He ended up working 5 years. He ended up running the stone yard for a long time. He kept knocking down certifications, because certifications, we believe, are the new gold currency in this new hiring community. He recently left, just not too long ago, after 5 years, when he got his real estate license and got an opportunity to go work on developments. He wants to build housing communities someday, and he absolutely will. Luis was considering dropping out in his junior year of high school to go pound stone and work with his father in that company. We gave him, I call it chutes and ladders, I call it officers training, all sorts of different things, but we gave him that chance to jump to a different level, and he went off and did amazing things. Bronte is a sterile processing technician who works for the hospital. I like these emotional stories, Harry. So, about all that kind of stuff. It's just the way I tell it. But one of Bronte's colleagues was a guy named Jonathan. Jonathan worked as a patient intake. He was sitting at the hospital during the patient intake time, where the people will come up and they'll start giving their initial information. One of the persons who was there was exhibiting some symptoms at the emergency room that he recognized because of the training that had been given him. This was a quiet kid, a kid that I didn't even know if he was going to make it through the interview process because he was so shy, but he ended up being patient intake. There's a quiet kid. Somebody exhibited some symptoms. The nurses came and grabbed this kid. 10 minutes later, the surgeon comes out of the ER and kind of blasts into the waiting room area and says, "Who sent that kid back?" And the nurse, "Who sent that person back?" And Jonathan shyly raised his hand, and the surgeon said, "You saved his life," and then turned and walked back out the door, because there was something that he had just noticed in his training right there. This quiet kid who we didn't think was going to be there. He's on his way at this point to becoming a neurosurgeon, because of the way that the different surgeons have adopted him and kind of changed that way. The success stories are myriad throughout these students. I had a dad grab me one time by both my shoulders, and it was after one of the presentations, and his daughter had just gotten in apprenticeship programs, and he said, "Is all this true?" And I said, "It really is true, sir. It makes sense for our community." And then the dad pushed me away with tears in his eyes. So, we've had some of the ones fail out too, but the success stories that is happening in our community, which is why we're on our 8th cohort, and continue to add new businesses every time, because it just fits with our valley demographics. Really, we're able to explain that why. All right, I'll be quiet.
Thanks, Eric. Those are brilliant, brilliant success stories. We've got a few questions in the sidebar I'll pick up in a second. Before we do, Brent, I want to come back to you. You talked about the kind of the business environment. You mentioned businesses aren't used to cooperating. So I want to ask, what does that look like in New York? How are you getting employers who are competitors to come around the same table, work on a shared talent pipeline?
I think the talent need in the healthcare sector, particularly in nursing, is just so pronounced that you can, Harry, I'll use someone from your homeland's famous quote of, we'll usually do the right thing after exhausting all possible alternatives. And I think that's very much what, and that's a Churchill quote, not my genius by any means, but I would say that I think we're seeing that a little bit, is that hospitals have been plugging the holes on a lot of these long-term workforce challenges. The pandemic put incredible pressure on that workforce. They're looking at particularly high talent costs associated with traveling nurses and short-term workforce solutions, that whether you are New York Health and Hospitals, which is a association of, community-based clinics, or Northwell, the largest kind of provider system in the greater New York City region, you're feeling the pressure of this. So I think there's something to be said about how you target and what goes into kind of the sectors you focus on. And it just speaks to the fact that something we all know. Life is easier when there's a need. And so I think there's that. When it comes down to the blocking and tackling, I think that sometimes it's looking at why is that cooperation sometimes hard, and trying to see, how you kind of unravel some of these things. I think one of the areas there is some benefit to be able to work with a joint training partner in the sense of like an 1199 SEIU, because they are a de facto workforce and education partner for several of those hospital systems already. And so leveraging the kind of places that hospitals are already working together on, or whether if even if it's not workforce related, I think is also really important, because they do have dialogue. It comes down to sort of how do you stay out of a world where when it comes to building the solution, you're not overly creating a targeted and customized solution that just you can't share costs, you can't do effective recruitment into a broader pipeline if everybody has 15 different specific requirements for what they want to see an apprentice walk through the door with. You can always let the hospitals do what they need. And I think there is competition amongst them as well when it comes to retaining entry level talent. And that's healthy. And so I think that in the sense of who wants to create the culture that these entry level folks want to stay with, who, let them compete on things they want to compete on, let them also make sure that apprenticeship creates a space for doing a lot of the more customized training and proprietary stuff, because so much of it is on the job. But be really clear about where you need them to collaborate. And I have not seen a lot of success in workforce development in general when you try to approach collaboration from the standpoint of collaboration's sake. And so really understanding in that three-phase model, these are the areas where we need alignment and some level of agreement and standardization to move the aircraft carrier that can be our education and training partners, because they can't flip on a dime for one employer here and one employer there. On the other hand, be very clear where in that sequence the customization comes in, the competition comes in. And a lot of the competition is on the retention side. And I think one of the biggest barriers to competition of cooperation is the fact of, yeah, I won't do it if someone else isn't. And in a sense that they're just going to sit back and take the people I train. That's the old adage, right? That comes out in this work a lot. So I don't think there's a silver bullet to this point, as much as like be specific about what you're seeking cooperation on and when. Go where the cooperation's already happening. And I think most importantly is focus where there's a need. And I think Eric laid it out well from a community lens. Very much what we're dealing with is from an industry sector lens.
Brilliant. Thanks, Brent. That's a great message. Be specific on where you can collaborate, and understand you've got to drop in a minute for your next call. So thanks for everything you're doing in New York and for sharing that.
Thanks for creating space, Harry.
I am gonna pick up a few of the questions in the sidebar. So Kathleen's asked a great question about whether you're tracking long-term retention of apprenticeships, which speaks to what you were talking about earlier, Jill, on the kind of post program engagement. So Jill, Eric, open to both of you. You're able to track retention past the apprenticeship program. What does that look like?
Ma'am.
Great. I think that this is, well, one, we're now at the point in our evolution where we can start to track this as we have more and more alumni out there in the world. And so I think one, it's making sure that we have the infrastructure to keep track of and keep tabs on our alumni. I don't have the exact figures of like, this is the percentage that stay with their their employer during the apprenticeship, but I do have a research study that we conducted that's a few years old. It's called the Options Multiplier, which did track the outcomes from Careerwise's first few cohorts. Again, it takes a while in multi-year programs to actually have that kind of first destination data available. So Harry, I'm happy to share that research with you. Because that actually talks about like X% have stayed with their employer X% have stayed in that field where they were employed as an apprentice. X% have gone on to higher education. And what percent have dropped out altogether? That last percent is quite small. Again, the figures are not in my head at the moment, but I think when you compare like what's the dropout rate from higher education with what's the dropout rate from an apprenticeship, we win, right? Because it's not just a successful outcome if you're staying with the employer that hired you, especially if the apprenticeship itself is high quality and the employer is recouping or gaining an ROI during the apprenticeship, which really is the goal of our programming, that they are finding value during the apprenticeship, not having to wait until afterwards. So then that makes it, not as heartbreaking if an apprentice were to leave. But to the point that Eric and Brent were talking about, it is incumbent upon an employer who is pouring in and investing in this apprentice to make the experience one that the apprentice wants to continue on with that employer. So that's where we really start to see the employers realizing, oh, wow, I've poured into this young person. I'm only paying them a training wage. So yes, if I am paying for the RTI, it is still cheaper than hiring an entry-level person off the street. And, taking into account all of those marketing fees and that sort of thing, the churn of constant recruitment. So that balances out in their favor. But if they're recouping that ROI during the apprenticeship, it is not make or break if the apprentice stays on with them. That long-winded answer, all of that to say, we are continuing to get even more data as we continue with these annual alumni surveys. And we'll share all of that with Harry so he can follow up afterwards with the.
Thanks, Jill. That's a great answer. I
I
think on the
ditto
data.
all that, by the way, Harry. Exactly the same that Jill was saying, just maybe on a smaller scale. So it's exactly the same as what she's saying. And making sure to emphasize that during that 2-year period, the businesses are getting that positive ROI, sometimes in spades as it comes through. I mean, my banking people like to tell me we make them ROI positive in 2 weeks. So it's,
Well,
yeah, it works.
that's amazing. I think we've got time for one more question. I am going to randomly pick Mike's question about how do you fit RTI courses within a high school schedule? How do you navigate those kind of, it's a slightly different model from your traditional high school schedule. How do you work that out with the school district? Eric, how's that worked in Vail?
Individually, every student is on their own individual plan, to be honest. I mean, as much of the RTI courses that we use through our local community college, it's a lot more certifications, like I said, and studying towards those nowadays. But we make it work within our high school schedule. What we've done in this community is Careerwise as a class now at the high school. So when you are going to your apprenticeship, you're actually earning elective credit as well, because our high school believes that they are learning so much when they're away from the building. And through some of the high school dual enrollment programs, if the students, while they're still in high school, choose to take those programs, those are paid for by the high school system. So the students are getting free credentials, if you will, free college credit on a lot of times. And I've had so many students that have said, and entering the programs, I know Jill has before too, students who say, I'm doing this because I don't want to go to college. And then the student ends up 2 years into the apprenticeship saying, I am 7 credits away from an associate's degree and my business is willing to pay for it. Eric, should I get a college degree? Because I wasn't in this for a college degree. And I say, absolutely. Again, I said it before, it's just another tool in their tool belt. So we design it individually with each student, but and through the different schedules and different schools. But our community college, our local community college, is by and large our best provider for that. And with the dual enrollment program, it works easily.
Brilliant. Thanks, Eric. I'm afraid we're out of time. Sorry, we've only picked up about 20% of the questions we've got on this. Clearly it's a hot topic and there's lots to cover. But thank you so much to Jill, Eric, Brent, the whole Careerwise team. Very quickly, we've got a few more webinars coming up throughout the summer. Next week, we've got one on a research report we're about to put out on data and apprenticeships and what can we do to improve that. And then we've got some policy ones in August, one on the current rulemaking on EEO, and then one on workforce pale and gathering feedback on how we can, what suggestions can we make to make that work for apprenticeship. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We'll send out the recording, and thank you to our friends from Careerwise.